Jesus saw the crowds, and he went up on a mountain. And after he sat down, his disciples came to him. And he began to speak, and he taught them, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of God." The gospel of our Lord. Thanks be to God. Please be seated. Have a close encounter. I shared with you a couple of weeks ago that the Beatitudes are probably some of the most well-known parts of all of Scripture. We find them in Luke, and we find them in Matthew. But also, in all probability, some of the most misunderstood. There was a book written by a rather intriguing and well-known TV personality, evangelist kind of guy. You may know him. He has had it, because he's no longer involved. His parish was in Southern California, where he built a behemoth of a crystal cathedral. And one of the numerous books that he wrote were called the Be Happy Attitudes. Trying to play off the idea that somehow the Beatitudes were things which would make you happy. But the word that's used here is not happy. Happy comes from the root word of hap, which is what we also get happenstance. So happy really has, in its sense, something over which we have very little control. It just sort of happens. That's not what this says. It said, blessed. And I want to focus on that word for just a moment. But remind ourselves, a couple of weeks ago, as I shared with you, this whole idea of using our time of Lent to empty ourselves so that we may be filled with God. Now, I don't know how many of you have this Lenten tradition of where you give up something. As a kid, I always gave up drinking and smoking. Because that was really pretty easy, you know? So what are you giving up for Lent? I'm drinking. How old are you? 14. The reason that we would give up something is not to somehow enter into the sacrifice of Christ, but rather the idea is to allow ourselves some space and some room to engage in spiritual discipline. And I'm going to come back to that in just a moment. So Lent is a time when we empty ourselves so that we may be filled with the mystery and the marvelous wonder of God. Now Jesus sees a crowd, and so he goes up on what's called a mountain. It wasn't a mountain, it was a hill. In fact, back in like the 3rd or 4th century, they actually built a church on that supposed hill. And then he sits down. Now we don't hear kind of the importance of that, because we don't do that. But if we are to connect some dots, we'll go, oh yeah. What do they call the head of a department in college?
Department chair.
The chair. Why?
Doesn't do anything, he just sits around.
Oh, he sits around. Any former Catholics here? Okay, so you'll know this answer. When the Pope speaks officially, what does the Pope do? He sits in his big chair. We sort of don't get that connection. But in Jesus' time, teachers didn't stand up and wander around like they do now. They sat down. And that means that what they were saying is official. There's even a Latin term called ex cathedra, which means from the chair. And so while we still have vestiges of this, we've lost kind of that connection. What Jesus is about to say, we know is going to be vitally important because he sits. And then he starts with, blessed are the poor. Blessed are the poor. Now, I shared with you a couple of weeks ago how different sort of denominations, different groups of people have taken these and kind of divided them up into how they approach this. Most liberal theologians see this as what they call the social gospel. Conservative theologians have said, well, this is something about a kingdom that will come. Others have done other things with them. But what is Jesus saying when he says, blessed are the poor? Is he saying that there is somehow a higher virtue in being poor? And the answer to that is clearly no. There is no. I missed something. When I said poor, did you feel bad? It's not that we are to somehow subscribe to the idea that we ought to just make everybody penniless because then they will be so blessed. What Jesus is talking about here is the willingness to empty ourselves. To let go of those things that we believed were so vital and so important. To let go of those so that we may be filled with God. And that's what that term literally means. It means to empty one's self. It doesn't mean that there's a particular virtue of being poor. There's not a particular virtue of being wealthy. But rather it is the willingness to empty ourselves. And in doing so, to acknowledge that God owes me nothing. I deserve nothing. Regardless of who I am, regardless of what I've done, regardless of the talents I may have or don't have, I deserve nothing. And this Lenten journey will be slowly bringing us to that point where we come eyeball to eyeball on Good Friday with the cross, where we understand just how utterly we deserve nothing. And I love the way a little piece in Corinthians. Paul writes, do not deceive yourself. If you think that you are wise in this age, you should become fools, so that you may become wise. In other words, empty yourself of those things which you thought were so utterly important, so that in fact God can fill you with what is vitally important. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God. That willingness to empty ourselves. So when I use the term spiritual gifts, what comes to mind? What are those things we are to be practicing during this time of Lent? Now, when you play football, you practice, right? No. Volleyball, you practice. Basketball, you practice. Why do you do that? Why not just show up for the game? So what are our disciplines? Patience? Okay. More concrete. How about prayer? Is that not a spiritual discipline? Remember, God owes me nothing. I deserve nothing. So everything that comes to me comes by the sure goodness and grace of God. Prayer. Meditate. Do you meditate? Do you take some time out from the hecticness of our lives to simply sit down and empty your mind? If there's one catchword for people who are alive today, what is the catchword? I'm busy. I'm so busy. I got kids and events, activities. They're going this way. They're going that way. At some point in the near future, I'm going to have my sermon about how let kids be kids for a while. It's really kind of fun. There's an awful lot of parents that have never allowed their children to be kids. You know, go out and get in all sorts of trouble. That's the point. You know, there's very little things your mother can't bail you out of, you know. Even jail. I gave a sermon one time and some lady came up and just reamed me out. He said, let your kid be a kid. I can't be. They got this, they got that, they got to go to, you know, Stanford or something. I don't know. I'm going, really? Yeah. God forbid they go to just a good old ordinary state college like I did. You know, I mean, horrible. You know. I guess now you got a lot of money, you can get your kid in. You can pay somebody to grease the skids for you. Like we didn't already know that. I mean, really. You know. Have you ever thought that service is a spiritual discipline? Service. Helping somebody out. That week my wife was gone. I was here for confirmation with the best confirmation kids on the planet. But because my Maggie Pie was at home by herself, I drove back that Wednesday night. And as I was driving up my street, all of a sudden I realized, the grader had come through. And there was like 4-foot walls of snow across all of the little driveways. I'm going, oh, it was like 9:30 at night, and I'm getting home, and I'm thinking, oh, I gotta park on the street in there. And I turned and got next to my driveway, and it was all cleaned out. And so I saw my one neighbor, Jeff, he's a psych teacher at North, and Jeff was out snow blowing his, and I said, wow, thanks for doing that. He goes, I didn't do it, but I'll take the credit. So I was your neighbor on the other side. Just doing those random acts of service for another. That's a discipline. Did you know that worship is a spiritual discipline. It's kind of like practice. If you don't show up, it's hard to know what the plays are. Worship is a spiritual discipline. And I'm going to list some more as we go through our time together on these Wednesday evenings. But the purpose of Lent is to revisit some of these spiritual disciplines, to remove some of the hecticness of our lives. Is that a word, hecticness? It is now. To remove some of the clutter from our lives. And allow ourselves that space so that God can fill us. It doesn't happen much today. It did when you were a kid, a long time ago. And when you were kids, a long time ago. Me, I hardly remember it. Well, we had, I know this is really hard for you, but, I saw this great little thing. They had, young people your age, and they gave them a rotary dial phone and a phone number. And it was like 20 minutes later, and they still hadn't figured out how it worked. But when, the old days, when you used to have a phone, it was actually, either on your wall or on your whatever, and you would be trying to call somebody, and the phone line was busy. And you'd get that annoying beep, 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 beep. I have a strange feeling that's how God feels most of the time. God's trying to get through to us, and all he gets is a busy signal. And this time of year is a time to remind ourselves that it's okay every now and then just to hang the phone up. To put aside some of the distraction. And simply allow God to fill us. Blessed are they who allow God to fill them. Let us pray. Almighty and ever-living God, in this moment, allow us to sense your grace, your presence. Fill us even in the midst of our struggles, in the times of our distraction. Give us that sense of your presence. All of this we pray in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, who taught his faithful people to pray, Our Father,
who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses,